how would you compare your experience with Carvykti relative to the autologous stem cell transplant that you had a number of years back?
Night and day. So my autologous stem cell transplant was brutal. Like, that was the beginning, even with the Mafilan treatment that you get at the start. That just wipes you out. I had major side effects, nauseousness, diarrhea, vomiting. I couldn't even stand the smell of food that they would bring in. As soon as I would smell food, I would just vomit right away. I had very low energy. I did not want to eat. I went into the hospital and I even gained weight to be prepared to lose weight. I was like 152 pounds. When I came out of the hospital, I was 135 pounds. So that was a very brutal process from stem cell transplant. And even coming home, I'll never forget, like, I was in the hospital for 14 days and coming home and just in bed, and I had to use the bathroom, and I found myself couldn't physically walk to the bathroom, where I'm crawling to get to the bathroom, and that's how hard the stem cell transplant was in the recovery. I go to Carvykti, and yes, I have low energy. The nauseousness was there, but it wasn't bad. I never really threw up. I never had that spell. Again, the fatigue was always there, the headaches, the tiredness, but I was able to physically still walk and move around and be about and kind of focus on my recovery and healing. And it's a stark difference. It truly is a big difference. I'm 104 5 days out now, and 104 5 days out for stem cell transplant, I was still out of it.
Yeah, from a provider perspective, the one thing that we like about autologous stem cell transplant and high-dose melphalan is that the toxicities, as horrible as they are, you know exactly what's going to happen, you know exactly when it's going to happen, and you also have a rough idea of what the trajectory of recovery is going to be. When you go through CAR T-cell therapy in general, there's some unique side effects that patients experience related to immune activation as we give these weaponized CAR T-cells back to the patients that we need to be cognizant of, and they can be quite unusual. So we are on guard, for some of these quirky, for example, neurologic side effects that you were worried about, because what we've learned is, if you identify these things early and treat them aggressively, you can, prevent them from getting worse. So we've gotten better at this as we go, and I think, one of the key mitigation strategies to avoiding some of the more severe side effects related to CAR T-cell therapy in general is getting that burden of disease down to a bare minimum. Going into CAR T-cell therapy, you're less likely to have severe and prolonged drops in your blood counts. You're less likely to get the early neurologic side effects, the ICANS that we talk about when that happens. And you're less likely to get some of these other weird delayed neurologic side effects as well. So it's really a much smoother ride when you're able to control the disease going into the CAR T-cell infusion. All the more reason why we like, to use CAR T-cell therapy earlier in the disease continuum rather than as a last-ditch option when all other therapies have stopped working.
Yes, right. My recovery from Carvykti, it had its challenging moments for me. I had a little bit of CRS, and I also had these lingering headaches that would not go away. I also had low-grade fevers that lasted for about 10 days, and was able to get through all of that. But I think mentally for me as well, not knowing if this was really going to work, because again, having that chemo as your cushion for so long, for almost 12 years, and now that you've had Carvykti and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to infusion to take anything, I'm not taking chemo, so is it really keeping the cancer at bay? Is it really working to fight this off? And to get that news, like, yes, it's working. You are MRD negative. It's not there. Like, you're good. This could be my cure. So it's really phenomenal to hear, because it's something that I still can't process. It still doesn't seem real to me that I am MRD negative, because I have been doing this for so long. Being on a drug holiday finally, like no chemotherapy, I mean, that was our talks. I mean, we had those talks from 2019, 2021 on up, like, when is this day gonna come? And Dr. Voorhees was like, Carvykti, CAR-T, like, that's gonna be it for you. And that was my motivating driver to receive Carvykti, was for me to not to go into an infusion center with chemotherapy. Logistically, for me, I'm fortunate to have access to care within the Charlotte area in a big institution. It's only 20, 25 minutes away from me. So I am very fortunate, but I think about those rural communities who have to travel an hour, 2 hours away just for treatment, and who don't have that access to care, who can't afford to take off of work to go to a treatment facility, or don't have the monetary means to have transportation to get to and from a doctor's visit and appointment. So I am absolutely grateful for the access that I have. I know there are a lot of patients out there who do not have that, and I hope that gets better, like through providers and institutions as well, to be able to provide that care to the less fortunate communities that can't.
From a physician perspective, for those patients that do live a long ways away, there, the support of J&J with regards to Carvykti is important, because there are resources available to take the financial sting out of temporarily relocating to another area, whether we're doing it inpatient or whether we're doing it outpatient, which we're increasingly doing so nowadays. I think there are resources available to defray some of those costs of lodging, transportation, food, those sorts of things, which help overcome some of the logistical barriers to gaining access to us, which I think is absolutely critical. Another recent development, which is really key for patients, previously the FDA guidance after receiving Carvykti was that you couldn't drive for 8 weeks. That's a really big deal. That's especially for someone with an active life who's working, et cetera, that is a key liability. But, as we've gained more experience, with Carvykti, I think folks recognize that was an overly draconian restriction, and the FDA recently issued guidance restricting that down to 2 weeks for those patients that are doing well and not experiencing any of the uncommon neurologic side effects that can sometimes arise. And the patients only need to be near the center for 2 weeks as well. So as previously it was, a month. So I think that will help, patients gain access, to this therapy. One of the key things when we are treating a patient who comes from a long ways away, we have to develop a strong relationship with the local provider, the local hematologist, oncologist. They need to have our cell phones, and we need to have theirs. And, because typically, once you get out beyond a month, they're managing a lot of the day-to-day. They're managing the myeloma labs, they're doing the IVIG once a month, et cetera. But if there's a new neurologic side effect, they need to have us on the horn immediately. If there's any new gastrointestinal symptoms of diarrhea, we want them calling us right away to go through that, because there are some unusual side effects, again, that are very uncommon that can sometimes arise a little later in the game. So it's really important from a physician perspective to have that, dialogue with the local provider to make sure that the patient's ride remains smooth, once they're released from the CAR T-cell center.
Right. And just to bring up one more point, just kind of leading into that, is for me, I think the only time when I had my first fever that had spiked up to 100.4, that's when I went to the ER, and they worked me up with everything. Like, they were on top of everything. So that was a great thing. I think the only thing that kind of threw me off was when I walked in to the ER. Obviously I was masked up, but I wasn't isolated in a facility away from other people. I was with the general population, and I was just sitting there, and they were two individuals having a conversation. And so I walked up to the front desk, and I'm like, can someone see me right away, please? Like, I just had Carvicti, and I need to be isolated from everyone. And so that's whenever they kind of stepped up and they kind of moved me away from everyone at that point.
Yeah. No, I think if you're a patient who's been through CAR T-cell therapy recently and you need medical attention for whatever reason, if it's a fever, for example, or anything else, and you're at an urgent care or an emergency department or your primary care's doctor's office, you have to remind them, what you've just had. Now, in all honesty, you'll oftentimes experience circumstances where the provider you're talking to has absolutely no idea, what that is and what the consequences of having had recent CAR T-cell therapy are. And that's where the patient education becomes so critical, because you're actually educating the physicians in those circumstances about what they need to be thinking about, when it comes to your care.
Absolutely. Advocate, advocate, advocate.
Absolutely.